And with that, folks, the 2024 season is a wrap. We're going to discuss everything we saw in 30 minutes or a little more on today's episode of Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And if you're getting a little deja vu today, well, that's because, folks, the 2024 season is done. The 2024 season is over. And we are once again back with Gary Morgan on Monday to discuss yet another season in the books, my fourth covering this team. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make sure you go to FanDuel.com right now for all of your sports betting needs. You got football, you got playoff baseball, you got basketball and hockey coming right around the corner. So there's no shortage of anything to go bet on FanDuel.com. My name is Ethan Smith. That's Gary Morgan. Happy Monday, September 30th. No more baseball. This is the first time we've done a show since February on a Monday where we didn't have, baseball to look forward to, Gary. Interestingly enough, I'm kind of interested with what's going to happen this offseason because I said this going into the last offseason that I thought the last one was going to be the most eventful one. Who really knows now?
I mean, I think there's a lot of fans that decided this year was the year. And I mean, we tried on the site, that, to caution people that it probably wasn't. But, like, for instance, they only won 6 games less than I thought they would.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, pardon me while I'm not super shocked and crushed. I mean, I hope they do better, but like this is not that far off from what most of us expected. And even if they had done what I wanted them to and won 84 games, they'd have missed the playoffs anyway. So I mean, like, yep. I think not good enough was kind of the theme most of the year. You and I think, had a conversation sometime in June where we looked at each other, and I think I said on this show, they're just a 500 team, Ethan. That's just all there's. There's such a 500 team. I don't think they could ever overcome it. There was no moves really that were going to be made that were going to help them out of that hole. And there was no avoiding what they had to do with this pitching staff. They had to mess with it all year long, and it caught up with them.
Yeah, and you look at the record specifically, they finished with the exact same win total that they had in 2023. Some people are going to take whatever victory lap or whatever they want to do with that. For me, this 76-86 is very different from the 76-86 we saw last year. And to me, in a much better way. When you're talking about big positives here to start the show, because we know I try to be Mr. Positive guy all the time on this show about these things. At the end of the day, there was a lot that you look back on with this team. And I like that you brought up when you brought up in June about them being a 500 team. If you really look at how the entirety of this season went, they were a 500 team outside of one stretch of games. That eventually, if you go back and look at it, was the difference in them being 10 games under 500. If you go back and look at every other part of the season, they were virtually right smack dab down the middle. And that's just how the season went. And there was a lot of different trials and tribulations that they had to go through. There were a lot of injuries that happened that affected players throughout the season and affected the course of how things were going. And ultimately, biggest positives, a lot of this team is coming back. I mean, really, truthfully, a lot of these young players are going to be back next year. And I consider that a big positive because that, for me, means that you're going to have Paul Skeens a year better. You're going to have Jared Jones a year better. Nick Gonzalez a year better. A lot of these young guys that we kind of saw take that step forward are only going to get better in my mind. Now, could they regress, Gary? Yeah, they absolutely could. Any player
we see them regress every year. I mean, you expect Jack Sawinski to take a step this year. You don't expect him to fall off the table. You expected maybe Edward Olivares to at least do what he did the year before. right?
Yeah.
Like, so there's a lot of things like that that just don't take place as you expect them to. That's why you build in depth and you have enough options that you can pivot to something else if it's not working. They've got that kind of depth right now. I would say like what you're looking for now is for starters to emerge from that group of depth. The positives are, you're right, they're returning a lot of those players. That's not a positive that most fans are going to want to hear right now, because you want to see big changes, right? You want to see big changes after a 76 win season. You want to see them get over the hump, and they haven't left you a lot of room for big changes.
Mm-mm.
Like they really haven't. There's not a lot out there. Depending on what they do with Brian Reynolds, if they move him to first base, corner outfield becomes pretty clear need. But are they going to go get a shortstop when they have like 15 options? Even though I don't think any of them are good.
Yeah.
I don't know. I bet not. I don't think we're looking at transformative changes here. So the positives in some ways kind of lean right into the negatives. And that's
Yeah,
kind of what happens when you're a 500 team.
yeah, and it would be remissive, I think, to think that they would just start making these seismic changes after this, because this was a team that is finally kind of just predicated on its youth. Like, you saw them go out and get free agents that had mixed reviews, but throughout most of the season, I think the main talking points that we were talking about players specifically, were about players that are going to be here for a while. And for past seasons, that'd been kind of hard to find. Like, you're talking about the Skeens and Jones, Mitch Keller, even a Bailey Falter and a Luis Ortiz, guys like that. I mean, your whole rotation pretty much is going to be back next year that you had this year. You hopefully, I won't say probably, hopefully you won't have to tinker with it as much as you did this season. But when you go back into an off season and you say, okay, well, the rotation is going to probably end up being pretty much the same, I think a lot of teams would take that. Now, I'm not saying that things can't change. There are changes that could happen. But at the end of the day, you have a solid pitching staff. You're starting to kind of build a solid core with this team, and it's only going to continue to build together. So don't expect things to just magically change, at least as far as player personnel is concerned, because of where they were. That doesn't mean they're not going to make additions. That doesn't mean that they're not going to make subtractions. I just don't think this team is going to look seismically different than what we've seen through this year.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. I'm not sure how it would. I also think that's going to be disappointing for some fans. Again, people don't see growth. They don't see the possibility or the plausibility for it, Ethan. Like, Jack Sawinski is a completely dead entity to 90% of this fan base right now. Now, I guarantee he will come back in spring and be expected to participate in a competition for a spot on this rotation, on this roster. Doesn't mean he'll get it, but he's got options. He's hit a lot of home runs in this league. You're not going to just flush that. To fans, he's flushed. To fans, like, they've washed their hands of him ever being a possibility here. Brian De La Cruz is in that same kind of territory because they didn't see him hit those 18 home runs. They just know they're there.
Mm-hmm.
In their minds, Andy Haynes destroyed him. If you really are returning most of your roster next year and you're not changing most of the players, you have to change what?
Yep. Something else. And I've kind of hinted at it on this show over the course of the last couple of weeks, which, again, apologies for the schedule on this show for the last couple of weeks. A lot been going on, but we will have 5 episodes a week until they tell me not to in this off-season window, especially with player reviews and stuff like that, which will be starting pretty soon. I don't know if I'm going to start it tomorrow yet, folks. That's just a little programming note for you. But maybe start tomorrow, maybe Wednesday, considering the playoffs don't even really start until tomorrow. Technically, they start today. But some of the positives, Gary, I think that we hit on, I like them. I think you can look back on this season and actually find quite a bit of positive stuff to talk about. But for the part of the show that everybody probably wants to hear, what were some of the negatives that we saw in this 2024 campaign? We'll discuss on Locked On Pirates. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make sure you go to FanDuel.com right now because NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. I was watching Baltimore versus Buffalo yesterday. I had a hunch in my head that Derrick Henry was going to rush over 64.5 yards against the Bills defense. And on the first play of the game, he ran for an 87-yard touchdown, the longest in Ravens history. So that was a win for me, and it could be a win for you because you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Make sure to go to FanDuel for all of your sports betting needs this fall. And folks, right now is a great time to go listen to Paul Francis Sullivan of Locked On MLB. He'll be covering everything I'm sure going on today between Arizona and New York and all of that playoff implication, as well as the playoffs starting tomorrow, where, Gary, before we even get into it, I'm calling my shot right now. Both the highest seeds in the American League are losing their wild card series because they're going to get outpitched. I saw Detroit and Kansas City, I think, can outpitch Baltimore and Houston, and I think that's going to be the difference for them.
Yeah, I think Baltimore's going to find that pitching is their problem throughout this entire thing if they're not careful. So
Yeah,
we'll see how they actually move forward. But it's certainly an area of concern, I would say. The Yankees, it depends. You know, it really kind of depends on how their performers perform. They've got the pedigree to do better than they have, but
yeah, and it's a wide open playoffs this year, I would think, before we just to bring that up, you know, playoff baseball is still playoff baseball. I'm going to watch it all the time. But again, jokingly, the part of the show everybody's probably going to look forward to is the biggest negatives from this season. One, your record didn't improve, I think, is the biggest one. You stayed exactly on the same win total that you had last season. And two, I do think that there was a sense around the trade deadline that this team was a little, I don't want to say different, but back-to-back seasons now, you've been in a crucial spot in your season, Gary, where you've had a 10-game losing streak effectively take you out of that. 2 seasons in a row.
right.
So you start to wonder, okay, where are they without those? Like, where are they as a team without those? Because no, I'm not saying, folks, that 10 of those games, yeah, they're going to win all 10 of them if I erase it. No. But if they would have won 4 of them, I think you feel a whole lot better at about 80 and 82 than you do 76 and 86.
Sure. I mean, they made it difficult for themselves for sure. I mean, even if they had like pulled out that game, you know, at the last game of the season, yeah, we all would have known that it was because the Yankees didn't really play anybody in that last series and whatnot. But, you know, as time goes by, you get a month into the off season, all of a sudden, when you start saying that we improved, you're able to actually point to a record that's 1 game better. And most people will forget the circumstances by which you got there. Mm-hmm. And most people will understand that factually you're telling the truth. You can't do that now. You know, you have to say we were stuck in mud. There's no other way to put it. It is what it is. You can say that the roster looks better. I certainly feel better about the roster heading into spring already than I did last year. I guarantee I'll feel better about the starting rotation this year than I did last year. I probably won't allow myself to get as amped about the offense this year as I did last year. But it's hard to look at this roster and pretend that it isn't better. I know the record sucks, but there's just a lot more pieces there, man.
Yeah, and I think that going into this offseason and going to another negative here, I do think you would have hoped that you got more out of those free agent signings that you made, and I'll even include the trade deadline acquisitions in this as well. That's just baseball. They took a risk on some of these guys, and it just didn't pan out. But
do we really with the trade deadline though? In all sincerity, because Brian De La Cruz did exactly what he was doing in Miami. He either strikes out or hits home runs. That's all he's done. That's all he ever did. So he kind of did what he did. He hit 3 home runs for you. That's not as many as you want, but look at his average. It's right where it should be. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, you went and got while he was on the IL.
Mm-hmm.
So if you expected him to just jump right back into major leagues like nothing happened and he was going to just keep hitting 300, you probably should get fired. I think you got what you expected. I think IKF was a deal for next year. I think so was De La Cruz.
Yeah, and I see no issue in that either. Now, I do want to bring up something funny here with one of those is Jalen Beeks, who whatever. I think me and Gary, when we went to the Altoona game a couple weeks ago, talked about Luis Peralta for like half an hour. So I kind of wish I would have just had a microphone. I would have just threw that up here. But you look at what you were just saying, though, about the roster construction of this team and being kind of like having a negative aspect about it. Yeah, the free agents didn't pan out at all. That was also because there was a lot more needs on this team going into last offseason than I think there are now. Like you already mentioned, the possibility of Brian Reynolds playing first base fixes that problem. Then you have corner outfield spots. I'm like, well, there's guys here that I think they're going to give fair shakes to, but I could see them go out and go get somebody. And then you mentioned shortstop. I still think that would be another position that I would love them to go get. Outside of that, though, where do they really need to go get anything? I mean, I could see them get a bullpen arm, but a lot of the bullpen stuff I think was just struggles from guys that are not going to struggle this upcoming year in Holderman and Bednar and other guys. You're going to have more options internally for the bullpen too. And yeah, you could go see him get a starter or two just to have one, maybe just to have him there just in case. But I think what you've finally noticed is the balloon was way out here when this whole thing started. When I started this show, the balloon was all the way out here because they didn't know who was playing where. They didn't know what was going on. And slowly but surely it's shrinking. I'm not saying that it's shrinking all the way down, but it seems like every offseason now we're kind of like, yep, that's what they need. Yep, that's what they need. And instead of saying it 5 or 6 times, you're saying it maybe twice or 3 times.
The balloon's a good analogy too, because as it continues to shrink, the pressure gets stronger and stronger.
Yep.
I think it's appropriate. You have people talking about being fired right now, regardless of what they do. I think that's where you're at. That'll continue next year too if they don't make the playoffs. Like, make no mistake, next year's not a we kind of want to compete year. It's playoffs or bust next year. Has to.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're getting to the point with this rebuild now where no, we're not going to say year 5 to you 20 times and that make that my point. I'm not going to do that. It's just more of when the front office this offseason, and I remember doing the show with you after it happened, when they said, we see ourselves as a competitive team and that's what we're going to put on the field. You put it on yourself at that point. I mean, they really did. Now, for the fans, they took it and ran with it and said, oh, yeah, 2024 is the year. Let's go. But what me and Gary are saying here, it doesn't matter really what the front office tells you going into this offseason and going into 2025. You've already set the expectation as what it is. Now you got to go and do it. And I think that's the biggest kind of storyline we're going to see through the offseason is, one, who is making the decisions? Two, whoever is making the decisions, what decisions are they making? And three, how much better is it, like, will this team look from this year going into next year? But a lot of it is just going to be dictated by who's even making the decisions in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously point number one. We have to figure that out first. Second, I've said this before on this show, I think Mr. Ed could coach this team next year and they should be a playoff team. So part of me thinks a lot of this is just cosmetic. It's not going to change all that much. And as far as like just, money, I promise you right now, look, we're like, what? It's September 30th. I promise you right this second, you're going to be underwhelmed by the investments made this offseason. And I'm not even just saying that just because nutting's cheap. I just mean like most of your payroll increases are going to come from extensions that you've previously signed, like Keller getting a $10 million raise this year. And you're going to see things like that, the escalators that come in from the regular contracts, and they have a little bit of room to hire a guy or two.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not even about like that they can't spend more. It's just, I'm not sure you want them to. You're not going to flush all these kids.
Perfect example for this, folks, that Gary's making a point on. As Cincinnati Reds fans, what it's like when you're on the cusp with a young team and then you just go spend a bunch of money needlessly. And they'll tell you what it means when they went and spent money on things they didn't need and it blew up in their face. This was not this year. This was a couple years ago. But Reds fans will tell you, sometimes not spending the money is the smart move. And I'll even go ahead and throw it out here too. You talked about payroll increases internally. Who's to say O'Neal Cruz doesn't get an extension this offseason? Who's to say that there's other guys that don't? I mean,
absolutely. Any of that could happen for sure. I just, again, I think like if you start changing the GM, then you start changing the plan.
Yeah.
We haven't had a GM here that has locked down talent like this since Neil Huntington. Granted, that was the last one. He did it for the one window. He locked up the outfield of McCutchen, Starling Marte, and Gregory Polanco. I guess you can give him credit for extending Liriano if you want to, even though it was really more of a retention.
Yeah.
But that's it. I've been encouraged that Cherington has been locking down core pieces, even if it's potential that he made a mistake with Hayes. I don't necessarily want to see that stop. So I would hope whoever comes in still kind of has that vision, because I'd like to see them take a swing at Paul Skeens. I think that's doable yet. I think you can buy out all of his years of control, plus some, offer him a very fair wage, and get this done. I think O'Neal Cruz could get done.
Yeah.
But if he goes, I don't know if that's even in their plans.
Yeah, and that message to fans would be huge for a guy like Paul Skeens to get him locked in, because that would just, if it does happen and he does stay here for a very long time, there will be a lot of me going through this and finding bookmarks of tweets from people that will be on this show if Paul Skeens gets extended for a long time in Pittsburgh. But Gary, we're going to end this show about the 2024 season talking about what we learned about next season this year and some of our biggest surprises on the final part of today's episode of Locked On Pirates. Well, folks, if you happen to be here and you're a fan of a team that's in the postseason and you want to go catch some postseason baseball, download the Game Time app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, because Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You can get all-in pricing. Toggling that feature will show you your total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry for any events like sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDON MLB for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. And folks, thank you for always tuning into the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network. For my everydayers and third segment listeners, welcome, of course, to the final segment of the day. And biggest surprises, Gary, that you had in 2024 that really just, I don't know, maybe just you didn't expect to happen?
Jared Jones making the team out of camp, for sure, didn't expect.
Yeah.
Paul Skeens getting called up before Super 2, certainly didn't expect. Just history tells me not to expect those, so I'm kind of encouraged that those took place. Jack Swinsky completely falling off the table. I'm not saying I thought he was going to blossom into a star, but I didn't think he was going to turn into a potato. That was awful. Henry Davis doing absolutely nothing. I thought, sure, he was going to contribute this year in some way, shape, or form, especially offensively. Turns out defensively, he kind of earned his stripes, and offensively, he's a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
Bailey Falter. Boy, if Bailey Falter didn't impress you this year, I'm not really sure what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Nobody expected him to even make this team, let alone be one of their better pitchers pretty much all year. And he certainly was. And then Mitch Keller, 2 years in a row of second half failures. I shouldn't say so much that this surprised me as much as really kind of took me off guard a little bit. He shouldn't be getting passed by two rookies that easily.
No, and I agree. And then you look at some other big surprises that we saw. Joey Bart, obviously, massive one. Big question surrounding him, I think, is that sustainable offensively for him? Because he has literally never done that before at the major league level.
Yeah, he has, actually. In 2022, he had a season very similar. I actually just outlined this in a piece last week on Steel City Pirates. I put side by side his 2024 and his 2022 numbers. Go back and look and see how freakishly close they are. It actually shocked me when I did it. And then what happened to 2023? Injury, no opportunity. Injuries have plagued him his entire career. He had the injury bug this year too. I think he's going to go in as the incumbent starter, but I fully expect him to lose it by the end of the year and then be a really, really solid backup /DH for this team.
Yeah, and I have no problem with that. And yeah, to say I even have looked at his past statistics and I was like, yeah, but probably more on the advanced side, and some of the splits are probably what I would imagine are eerily similar with him from 22 to 24.
I don't have time to find it right now, or I would, but just check it out for real.
Just believe Gary and go look at his stats and then I'll do the same thing. But another guy, too, that I wanted to bring up in this before we get into what we learned about next season this year is the quiet surprises that you see. And that's something that I try to tell people on this show. Don't just look at the name on the back of the jersey and assume that the person is terrible or that person is good. Don't do that. Because there's one player on this team that I really didn't give flowers too much, but actually had a phenomenal season. That's Dennis Santana. They got that guy for nothing. And for a stretch of games, for pretty much the whole second half, he had 18 consecutive outings where he didn't allow a run. But because he was a DFA or whatever he was from the Yankees and they got him off the waiver wire, oh, yeah, that guy's terrible immediately. So that's one thing I think I would urge people to is even these playoff teams have to get contributions from Dennis Santana-like players. And that's ultimately what can make the difference here. And that's the kind of things that I think you're going to see moving forward. Is what I learned about next season is something Gary already said. You have plenty of options everywhere. Somebody has to take it over. Somebody has to go to right field and take that spot over. Somebody has to go to shortstop, potentially, depending on what they do with IKF.
Well, they have to manage that into existence too, because they
Yes.
bounce people around so much that I don't know how you expect anyone to ever get entrenched anywhere. Like, you want somebody to take over first base? Well, a good first step is to let them freaking play it.
Mm-hmm.
And like not twice a week. Like, let them play it for a minute. Let's see. You want somebody to step up at shortstop? Put them in there and leave them there for a while. Let's see. Like, you don't get anything by popping guys in there 1-2 days. And I have the Bart stats now. 2024 and 2022. He had 78 games this year. He's had one more than that now. This was a couple days ago. 97 in 2022. So very similar, because of injuries, right? Home runs this year, 13. 2022, 11. Right? Right there. RBIs, way more this year. OPS, way more this year. Everything else is comparable, right up and down. All he did is walk more this year and strike out less. That's it. That's the big revelation with Joey Bart. Is it sustainable? Maybe, because I think he really has changed something with his swing. Can he stay healthy, though? Haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and that's the big conversation with a lot of what we're going to be talking about through the offseason. You have guys like Brian Hayes, who we'll see what happens there, starting a new rehab program this offseason, so we'll see what happens there. Obviously, you hope that, unlike last offseason, we kind of avoid some of those elbow injuries, knock on wood here for everybody involved. And yeah, I think 2024 was a fun year, arguably the funnest that I've covered this team on this show. I don't think it's really hard to say that. I mean, watching a generational pitcher throw every 5 days or whatever days they want to decide to let them throw, on top of just the biggest thing I think too that I learned this year, you're starting to see this core come together a little bit. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but you're starting to see this group come together. Like, you're starting to see where the holes are clearly defined, where things are happening. And at the end of the day, folks, don't forget, because you guys love to bring it up, there's still a lot of fun kids coming on the way too. There's a lot of them coming, in my opinion, at least. I think they're going to be great, but we'll see how it all goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an educational season, a necessary step of a season. I would have liked to have seen them get a little bit further. I think the off season was the time to complain about a lot of that stuff, though, not the deadline. I think the off season, they could have done a little bit better at addressing some of these holes more competently and more long term than they did. That said, I'm not going to prosecute them for past sins. I just want to see it better in the future, and I'm not in charge of firing anybody anyway. We'll see how that rolls.
Yeah, and that could be one of the biggest talking points, if not the biggest, of the entire offseason. And we will be here on the Locked On Pirates podcast throughout the offseason, keeping you in the know with everything going on about the Pittsburgh Pirates. My name is Ethan Smith. Follow me on Twitter right there at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Gary will have 5 thoughts at 5 with you on Steel City Pirates. You'll also notice when I do start my player reviews that they're going to kind of go in tandem with the website and the show. So be ready to find those when they come at you. Gary, as far as Thursday on your show, who do you have on this week?
Just me and Jim this week. We need it to be tidy because we have no idea what we're going to be talking about. There could be firings. There could be just general off-season discussion like we did here. We'll see.
So, folks, you still got plenty of Pirates coverage all over the place, especially here on Locked On Pirates. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday, September 30th, which, if I do my math correctly, that is the last day of September, which means we enter my birthday month. Well, once you start getting up there, it's fine. Yeah, whatever. Guys, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday. We'll see you tomorrow.